Hello and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. For this episode, we have two guests. Nicholas Gilmour joins us from Wanaka and Tristram Hicks all the way from England. They're here to talk about a new book they've co-authored. It's called The War on Dirty Money. Hi Nicholas and hi Tristram, and thanks to both of you for joining us in our different time zones. We appreciate that. Look, firstly, can you briefly tell us a little bit about yourselves and also how you came to write this book together?
Okay, Gareth, thanks very much for the invitation to be here, and good evening to everybody. The story of me in terms of this book is for the last dozen years I've had the privilege to travel around the world and help prosecutors and police officers understand how they can do asset recovery from criminals to confiscate criminal assets so that crime doesn't pay. And I've travelled all over the world doing that for the last 12 years. For the 10 years before that, I was on the United Kingdom National Criminal Finance Board. And that's a multi-agency committee implementing the Proceeds of Crime Act and taking the UK to a very good place in terms of our ability to confiscate assets from criminals. And at the same time as being on the committee, I was in operational command of financial investigators, tackling organised crime, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and dealing with all kinds of crime where money is the motive. So that's my background in a nutshell.
Great, thanks Tristram. And Nicholas?
Yeah, Gareth, thanks for having us. My background has probably come from reading about organised crime for the last 30 years. For the last 23 years, I've tried to find out as much as possible about organised crime, in particular the financial side to it. So I've been a police officer both in the UK and New Zealand. I've worked in the Financial Intelligence Unit and the National Intelligence Centre here in New Zealand. And I've studied anti-money laundering or the prevention of money laundering through high-value portable commodities and cash-intensive businesses during my doctoral study. So I've been fortunate enough to have the theory side in academia as well as the practical side within law enforcement. I guess why the book came about, because that was one of your questions. Well, when I was looking for research topics in 2009, I tapped Tristram on the shoulder and asked him if he wanted a cup of tea. And the aim was to basically pick his brains about topics that were of relevance at the time. Move forward 10 years and those topics were still relevant. Those still topics of research that really needed to be answered by good solid research. So I was asked if I was interested in writing a book following a presentation I gave, and of course Tristram was the first person I contacted next to see, should we write a book? And his answer was yes. Here's my 10 chapters, and I guess here we are today with a book of 21 chapters covering what is effectively the broad spectrum of the war on dirty money.
Absolutely. Look, it's a very good, thought-provoking book. I thought, guys. So yeah, we appreciate you bringing it to our attention. I thought it'd be good just to start off at the beginning, just to get some of the key definitions, explanations sorted, and especially in terms of where you guys are coming from, because some of the way you set things out is perhaps a bit different from what people might typically think about when they think about money laundering or dirty money. So let's start off with if I ask you, what is dirty money and what is money laundering?
I think it's a really good question to start with, and there is a simple answer to what is dirty money. And effectively, dirty money is all money deriving from a crime. If you don't have a crime, you don't have dirty money. It's as simple as that. And I know you what you say in the book is that very much we do take a different approach to our understanding of these problems, and it might not conform with normal reality and what people generally have understood. And that's because typically our understanding is maybe 20, 30 years old, and we've stuck with those facts of repetition. And we bring to the book a different perspective. So for us, what is money laundering? Well, money laundering is basically the dirty money which needs to be cleaned, is how many people would see it. But actually, we never clean the money. We're not looking for the parcel whiter than white type approach. We're not using the washing machine. We're not hanging the banknotes on the washing line to dry them after we've cleaned them. We're talking about dirty money that basically stays dirty after the crime forever. What the criminal's looking at doing, though, is distancing that money from the initial crime. They're looking to put a gap between it. They're looking to put different information between it. Because you could say that it's better to be seen as a wealthy individual than it is a successful criminal. If the criminal's seen to be linked back to the crime, then questions will be asked about the money. So money laundering is very much a process of distancing. And for maybe 30 years, we've used a standard approach to understanding money laundering. And that is a 3-stage model of placement, layering, and integration. And it was the United Nations that came up with that model. And they said, basically, if you introduce dirty money into the formal banking system, you place that money in. You integrate it by moving it around. And in doing so, you're creating that gap, that distance between the crime and the criminal and the money at the end. And then you integrate it. And what we see by integration is very much what you see in the media, is where those expensive cars and those properties have all been purchased using that money. Still dirty money. So those assets are still tainted with the original crime. The gap is just a lot greater. Now, we say in the book, actually, money laundering is not placement, layering, integration anymore. It's a series of transfers and purchases. Because over the years, we've actually complicated money laundering to a point where we've needed to define it to try and make people understand it. And by understanding it, we've created typology reports. So you now have what you could call professional money launderers in each of those typologies. But the money launderer is not thinking in a series of typologies. They're thinking, how do I distance the crime from the final funds? How do I create that break in knowledge, that distance, which makes it difficult for law enforcement to link what I have at the end right back to the initial crime? And those initial crimes are quite serious crimes. We're talking about human trafficking. We're talking about drugs. We're talking about environmental crimes, which are not necessarily seen by many people as serious crimes, but they generate huge amounts of wealth. But the criminal's interest is to distance themselves. So money laundering, as we say in the book, is different now than it was 30 years when we first tried to define it.
You also say in the book that money laundering is integral to every crime motivated by money. I thought that was a really important point. Can you just explain why you made that point?
Well, I guess it begins with how the war on dirty money really started. So this begins with a committee meeting in 1989 of the OECD, which is essentially the group of rich countries led by the United States. They were very concerned about two things at the time. The first was drug money. They were very concerned about the fortunes that were being made in the United States in particular by the dealing in narcotics. And they were also concerned about evasion of American taxes. So they tasked a small subcommittee of the OECD, and that became known as the Financial Action Task Force. And they spent 6 months looking at dirty money, what that meant. And they decided, actually, it's not just drug money, it's money from all kinds of crime. And they came up with a list of 21 different types of crime, dealing from extortion to kidnap to theft to human trafficking, all the crimes you can think of. And they came back to the original committee, and the Financial Action Task Force was born, based in Paris, part of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And they have been setting the global standard for the last 30 years. Now, interestingly, those predicate offences, the offences which generate money, predicate offences, are ones that are done for financial purposes, didn't include tax evasion. So that didn't come in until 22 years later. Somehow it got lost in the debate. So dirty money didn't include tax evasion until 2012. And at the same time, the Financial Action Task Force changed its methodology from the concept of complying with regulations, complying with financial regulations will reduce the amount of money coming into the financial system, to look at operational effectiveness, which means actually taking money off criminals. So there's an evolution that's taken place in the FATF, which has changed things to firstly, they started with a narrow brief about drug crime. More or less immediately, they said, actually, it's a lot more than that, and came up with every other crime apart from tax evasion. And now we have a situation where we have operational effectiveness as the objective. So there's a little bit of history about why money laundering is integral to every crime. It's because the Financial Action Task Force said so, and they've given us a list of all those crimes.
And you also paint the picture in the book very, very clearly on how the countering financing of terrorism came into it, because now, of course, we have anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. And obviously that was after the events of 9/11 or September 11, 2001 in the US, New York in particular, and obviously Washington, the Pentagon. But you also note that about 210 or more than 210 billion US dollars a year is being spent fighting this war on dirty money, and that, you know, as you say, the battle's been going on for 30 plus years. There's a huge compliance industry around it, of course, with tens of thousands of people working in it. How successful is the fight proving to be?
Unfortunately, it's not very successful at all. And the reason is because it's a global war. It's a global problem, and it requires a global response. And the response is driven by the Financial Action Task Force, who rightfully set really good standards, as you would expect. They provide really good reassurance to all of the countries through reports and support, and they support the financial intelligence units by setting those standards. So you do have effectively a major or a leader in charge of the war on dirty money. But it's a global war, and there are over 200 battlefields where this war is being played out. And it's a challenge because you have, therefore, 200 different environments, 200 different approaches, 200 different attitudes. And then you have a number of countries which will just not play the game at all. Countries such as Iran, North Korea, and more recently Myanmar, who are countries who are on the Financial Action Task Force blacklist because they're not conforming to the requirements expected by countries to do. For FATF to who have dictated, who've said this is what you need to do, and some of that is very much because FATF have dictated it from a Western ideology. We're not going to do it anyway, and it doesn't suit us to do it. But still, we have 200 battlefields, and from that you have a number of people who are involved. You have the compliance sector, which is very much at one side of the scales, very weighted down, huge costs, lots of technology, lots of support, lots of resources. And then on the other side, you have law enforcement, who unfortunately are really much picking up the pieces. They're being left with very little support. They have a budget which is not even calculated. We don't even provide them with the IT resources to keep them playing in the game, dealing with their side of the expectations. So it's very much a challenge. And you're right, LexisNexis, who have an interest in this area, say that the compliance sector, the prevention side, is very much a 210 billion US dollar cost annually. So we're talking a huge amount of money, which is, of course, is then creating more and more solutions. So whilst the effort is very much on the placement side and the prevention side, we're still failing globally because we're still allowing crimes to continue. We're still allowing crimes to become very, very profitable. And you see these stories in the media where people are detained by law enforcement and their assets are seized or recovered or confiscated, depending on where you are in the world and how the terminology is used. But the cars are being taken away on transports, the properties are being locked up, and people are being told, actually, this no longer belongs to you, and we're going to take it away because it's part of a crime. But the actual results of that are not necessarily well researched. We don't understand the consequences of our actions. And you don't have to go far flicking through the TV channels to see, well, crime may be glorified and dramatized on many of these movies, but it's not too far from what is currently happening in the real world. Programs such as Ozark on Netflix, it's quite typical that money laundering would be going in this particular way. So it tends to prove that actually money laundering is happening on a daily basis right in front of our nose. It's happening everywhere. Like countries such as New Zealand and others right around the world are infested with dirty money, and money laundering is happening through societies that we wouldn't necessarily expect. Yes, you can still purchase a property with cash in some countries. Yes, you can still take money from one country to another just by completing the border control paperwork. But our entire approach to money laundering is only effective if we look at the side of prevention. If we actually look at it holistically, we are really, really struggling. And there's, as we list in the book, there are opportunities where we feel that you could actually make a difference quite quickly.
Let's have a look at those then. One point I thought was really interesting in the book is you're advocating researching what criminals think, suggesting that researching their behaviour after assets are seized or confiscated. I think that's an interesting point to start. But what are some other areas where you think we could move the needle in this battle or war?
First of all, I think we need to go back to the basics. I think we need to go back to understanding what actually is money laundering. Now, we've known for 30 years that money laundering was what it once was, but times have changed. We've all changed. Society's changed. Our approach to technology's changed. Our daily practices have changed, how we interact with each other. And as a result, the criminals have changed at the same time. And we recognise for many years that criminals are always 1, 2, 5, 10 steps ahead of us. They're always quicker to adopt to new methods based on new avenues to launder their illicit funds. So very much the approach of we go right back to the beginning, we start with that clean piece of paper, and we bring together people who understand how it is today. So very much we feel that there's a lot of tacit knowledge within the people who are in the fight against money laundering, both in the prevention side as well as the enforcement side, who never really have an opportunity to speak about what they see and hear and understand. There is very much the larger documentation from places like the Financial Action Task Force, which present an approach to money laundering. But if we go back to the basics and we ask how it is today, we would really have an understanding of, okay, this is the problem we're dealing with today. How can we then look at helping the prevention side more effectively, but also equally, how can we move some of those resources across to enforcement, where we can actually bring back the expertise that is in enforcement right back into law enforcement policing at the front line, and start linking all the pictures together, pulling the pieces of the puzzle together. Because unfortunately, money launderers do not necessarily tell us what happens and what they do when we talk to them. We actually have to start investigating those people, and we need to stop seeing them as some sort of really complicated and really sophisticated expertise. We actually have to simplify what they do and see it in our daily lives.
In terms of that 210 billion US dollars on the compliance side, could some of that be better spent on the enforcement side?
We think so, yes. As Nick said, we don't even know what the budget is on the enforcement side. So my experience of going around the world, talking to financial intelligence units and talking to compliance officers, they're very well resourced in the compliance area, and that's where most of that 210 billion is spent. I would say that financial intelligence units are also well resourced, um, because we know almost nothing about the enforcement side. We don't know how many people are working as financial investigators for law enforcement. We don't know how many prosecutors are specialising. What we do know from the FATF is that in 80% of countries, convicted criminals will keep the assets for which they were convicted. And that's because there is no financial investigation. Because there are no financial investigators, it's not a priority. And because of that, no evidence is produced for prosecutors to prosecute and for judges to judge. So it comes down to the initial approach to predicate crime where we need financial investigation to take place. And that is partly about objectives, and confiscation is frequently not an objective for law enforcement and prosecutors. It's also about financial intelligence, which is what the compliance people are generating. They're generating financial intelligence in the form of suspicious activity reports for law enforcement, but those reports aren't getting to the right bits of law enforcement. And frequently they get stuck in the FIUs, or they get sent to an economic crime unit in the law enforcement agency. And economic crime is typically not very well resourced because it's regarded as a very specialist area. So effectively we've pigeonholed crime, all those predicate crimes that were identified, into fraud or market manipulation or other specialized crimes, and we're channeling all of that financial intelligence into the smallest possible pigeonhole with the least possible resources. And the result is that the war against dirty money isn't joined up. So we need some resources on the law enforcement side, technology resources, skills resources, and lots more people. And there's no real debate about making that work.
You also make the point in the book that it is a global war, and as I think, Nicholas, you've already alluded to, countries, there's 200 battles going on in different countries, and there's certainly an element of global cooperation, but it doesn't seem to be good enough, and the attitudes don't always seem to be right. I mean, I know from my own reporting, for example, numerous companies registered in New Zealand, by somebody from overseas using a local agent or a lawyer or an accountant or somebody, then the company never actually has an office in New Zealand, never operates in New Zealand, and may be doing all sorts of illegal or dubious things overseas. And then if it turns really pear-shaped and you go to the New Zealand authorities and you say, hey, look what this New Zealand company did, they'll say, well, hey, that's, we don't regulate it. It's not in our jurisdiction. It's on the other side of the world, not our problem. I've found that attitude very frustrating at times, personally, when I've been reporting on these issues. But this type of thing goes on in various styles and ways all over the world. How can we get better global cooperation? And even, you look at the US and the UK as countries that have sort of publicly led this, but then you've got your Delawares and your Nevadas and the British Virgin Islands and the Channel Islands and all these other areas. And I mean, the Russian, you guys will be very familiar with the Russian money laundering through the London property market, et cetera, et cetera. So how can you really get a really, really strong global cooperation and effort on this?
Well, there are two issues that are working together there, Gareth. The first one is that companies do commit crimes, as you've said, and companies can be convicted. It's possible they're just a person in a legal sense, but the fact is that they're not. No country really has an effective justice system against companies committing crime, and they're just not equal before the law. So we really need to have a good look at companies being equal before the law, and we need to focus not just on striking the company off and dissolving it, but actually confiscating the assets. Obviously, we can't send a company to prison, but we can confiscate the assets, and we should take it from that approach. And one of the big things that gets in the way is the identification principle, which is the idea that in order to convict a company, you have to to find the controlling mind or the directing mind of the company. And that just creates a double indemnity, a double immunity for companies, because it's quite difficult to convict a company in the first place. If you have to find out who was actually making the decision, that decision to do the crime in the company, then it's very difficult indeed to convict. And fundamentally, why should the public purse be spent identifying who that person is? It's the company that commits the crime. The company can work out for itself who's to blame at their own expense. In the meantime, the company should be convicted. The company should have assets confiscated to do recompense for the harm that's been done by the crime. So there's a real issue with companies. There is a big drive to find the beneficial ownership of companies. But actually, I feel that we're spending a lot of time creating databases, more rabbit holes for investigators to go down, because hiding the beneficial ownership has taken a 10, 20-year struggle to get to the stage where we're just now beginning to try and find beneficial ownerships. And actually, we've been fought tooth and nail all the way. And I think if we go down the route of more accessibility to company databases, then we're going to be fighting that fight forever. We need to be much more straightforward. Companies should be equal before the law, and we should focus on how we can make that happen. And we also need to make sure that companies are registered and their details are verified at the outset, so that people who want to create companies for the purpose of crime are deterred from doing so. So the verification of details going into company's house, irrespective of finding the beneficial ownership and everything, making sure that the details are correct upfront and verifying it would do a lot to prevent these criminals being created, these company criminals being created.
And it does seem like a fairly simple thing to do. You do say in the book that finding a person guilty of the crime of money laundering does not actually matter. I'm just wondering, why is that?
It's a really important point, I think. This is about the difference between investigating money laundering, because I do want that to be done, because that widens the field of investigation to bring all the circumstances of the crime to be investigated by the investigator and the prosecutor, to gather all the evidence that we can in as wide as possible. And we also want to confiscate the assets at the end that derive from those crimes. But in between, how you actually do it is a technical legal issue, because you can do civil recovery, you can do other forms of litigation against the cash, you can prosecute someone for the fraud or the human trafficking or whatever the predicate offence is. And if that legally gets you the result you want and allows you to confiscate, then having a charge for money laundering actually is a bit technically a detail, really. And there's far too much focus on saying, it's really important to convict people of money laundering. Well, not really. What's important is getting the assets back. And if that can be done by prosecuting for theft, then prosecute for theft. Keep it simple.
You also say that stopping money laundering would save lives, which I thought was a really interesting comment. How?
Yeah, Gareth, this is these are not our words. These are the words we need to put back to David Lewis, who was the former executive secretary for the Financial Action Task Force, and he was quite critical towards the end of his term, really, in the fact that he didn't hold any punches in terms of coming out with statements such as this. And we recognise this, and we've actually said in the book, this is probably one of the most important statements of recent times. And that is because we seem to be heading in a direction where success is neither really understood or recognised. We don't seem to be looking and promoting the successes we're having against the war on dirty money, against money laundering. And this statement about saving lives is, well, if you go back to the basics of take away the dirty money, deal with money laundering, you deal respectively with those 22 crime types, those predicate crimes, as we call them, that are the ones that are killing people. The human trafficking, the drugs, the knock-on effects of those two crimes themselves are huge on people's lives. People are dying as a result of those. And then you have environmental crimes where we don't necessarily see people die in the streets because there's a needle sticking out of their arm or a drug overdose, but the environmental impact on societies is huge, that people will die as a consequence. So if you take out money laundering, if you deal with money laundering and you can then deal with the initial crime, you are saving people's lives. Now, the challenge is whether David's comment has been forgotten quite quickly. Have we fallen back into a belief that compliance is dealing with many of these problems? If we just focus on compliance and we allow a law enforcement to do what it needs to do, is law enforcement, the tick box environment that we've fallen into with all the technology and many thousands of people, is that sufficient enough to stop people's lives? Now, I don't think it is. And I don't think we say that quite clearly in the book. Is that important statement, but the actual simplicity of that statement needs to be reminded by so many people. And if we can keep reminding people that what they do should ultimately be saving people's lives, then I think quite quickly many will realize, even with reading the book, is that what they're doing is not the right thing.
I think if I could just come in there with something. I mean, I've been thinking about this issue of saving lives. And pretty well every week, there's a story in the global press where something terrible has happened. For example, the Turkish earthquakes. And they're saying that those dreadful loss of life was significantly increased by the corruption around the building standards that allowed shoddy structures to fail. And this is about money laundering. This is about people committing corruption in order to make some money in the short term. And the result is, when a natural disaster happens, then the death toll is much increased. This is a very straightforward link between corruption and the loss of life. And at a more general level, if you take money out of the public purse because you're going to use it for your own purposes, then that means there's less money to spend on hospitals. There's less money for education, and there's less money for environmental areas. So we suffer from pollution, and pretty well everywhere you look, there are stories about pollution in the air and pollution in the water, overfishing, counterfeit medicines leading to loss of life in sub-Saharan Africa. I was reading 500,000 people had been killed over a period of time by counterfeit drugs. These are all examples of money laundering. It's all about getting the money. And every week something terrible happens, and I'd look at listeners, I advise listeners perhaps to think about a story of crime and disaster and think, actually, this is about money laundering. This is the message we want to get out there, that money laundering is actually a way we can approach these terrible disasters taking place across the world.
It's a very good point. Just a final question from me is the war on dirty money winnable?
We think it is. And it's going to be a difficult war to win. Let's not hold back any punches here. This is a global problem. It requires a global solution, but it is winnable, and it's winnable in small increments. And you're kind enough to say that in the book we don't necessarily just critique the problems. We actually identify some solutions, and we've done that. We've identified over 100 possibilities for people to address, to try and make a better environment. And it's not going to be easy, and it's going to mean that some people have to change their mindset completely, do a 180 degrees change in their mindset. But we see there to be many opportunities in both trying to create a better understanding of the problems, today's understanding of the problems of money laundering and the skills and the abilities and the procedures or the methodologies that the criminal will undertake. It would be nice to have a single definition of money laundering, because you have a compliance sector which is huge globally, and the figures speak for themselves, never mind the actual understanding around and the IT solutions around compliance, is that they work to a different definition to law enforcement. And then, of course, there's a different definition globally of how that's then seen to be a problem on a country's own battlefield. You've got good opportunities with enforcement as well. Law enforcement have an opportunity to have a stronger hold into the game, and Tristram will say that very much having enforcement on similar playing grounds, on similar playing setup as prevention would make a big but we're not saying we must take all the money away from prevention and compliance. We're saying there must be a shift, and one of those shifts could be really good technology, could be technology created for law enforcement's purposes, rather than creating more and more technology to support compliance and the regulatory technology, the reg tech to support and make compliance a lot easier. We could use some of that technology and some of that real good capability and move it to law enforcement.
Tristram, anything to add?
Yes, I think it is important that we have written a book that's full of solutions, and we have tried to identify where success has occurred. So there are examples of good law. The Proceeds of Crime Act in the UK changed the very approach that we have to crime, and the result in terms of asset recovery was 10, 15 times higher after the act was passed. I mean, it took 10 years, but it's still a great success, and we should look at why that was successful in the UK. There are other successes more recently in Kenya, where they've had convictions and have confiscated assets and returned them to communities. So there are examples of success in the world, and we look to the Financial Action Task Force to identify those successes, why they were successful, and to promulgate good practice. And at the moment, there's kind of a gap in the evaluation process for the FATF. Firstly, it only looks at countries, so it doesn't look about the illicit financial flows between countries. And we think that it could do that, and we've proposed a way of doing it. And we also think that it could, when it does an evaluation of a country, the country could be asked to make recommendations from its own good practice of the things that they think they've done well, that the FATF can validate, so that we could spread good practice from places like Kenya, which is a developing country, places like the UK, a developed country, so that we can provide solutions which are tried and tested and pass those to the rest of the world. Because there are examples of success, but we have difficulty in recognizing them. We should try harder doing that. More research about what is successful and how we can promulgate it.
Well, look, thanks a lot, gentlemen. That is Nicholas Gilmour and Tristram Hicks talking about their new book, The War on Dirty Money. And I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.